Hey guys, tonight we wander into the shadowy world of ancient Egypt, where golden tombs hold more than treasure. You trudge through endless desert sands, feeling the heat sting your skin, and maybe, just maybe, you're about to wake a curse older than history itself. You probably won't survive this. Or at least, that's the rumor whispered for centuries. The Curse of the Pharaohs is the kind of story that makes you double-check your flashlight before stepping inside a pyramid. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see who's awake with me in the dead of night. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Curse of the Pharaohs, at its core, is a classic. Disturb a royal tomb, and a terrible fate follows. The most famous case involves the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter and his team. Within months and years, a string of bizarre deaths and accidents, from Lord Carnarvon's fatal mosquito bite to mysterious illnesses, sparked sensational headlines. Was it supernatural justice? Or just coincidence amplified by eager reporters? Historians still argue whether the curse was real or a media invention to boost sales and add mystique to an already incredible find. But let's get quirky for a moment. The ancient Egyptians weren't just about curses as ghost stories. Some tombs bore inscriptions warning thieves of the wrath of the gods or eternal damnation. One curious fringe tidbit is that some researchers found that the tombs harbored deadly mold spores and bacteria, natural curses lurking in the dust, which might have sickened unwary explorers. Not quite the dramatic lightning bolts you imagined, but deadly nonetheless. And here's something most people don't realize. The idea of curses wasn't unique to the ancient Egyptians. In fact, the Egyptians may have been among the earliest cultures to formalize these warnings in stone, but similar practices appeared worldwide, from Mesopotamia's protective spells to the cryptic warnings in European burial sites. It's a global phenomenon that makes you wonder if the fear of disturbing the dead is just deeply wired in human nature. Also, in some tombs, archaeologists discovered that the so-called curses had another practical purpose: to deter grave robbers who might steal invaluable artifacts. These curses functioned as psychological warfare, the promise of doom being more effective than any physical trap. Whether those curses truly worked is, of course, a question historians debate. Imagine, too, the atmosphere in the excavation camps: heat, dust, rumors, and tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The media's appetite for sensationalism turned every accident into evidence of supernatural revenge. This blend of fact, fiction, and cultural misunderstanding is what gave the Curse of the Pharaohs its lasting power. Walking through the silent corridors of a pharaoh's tomb, you can almost feel the weight of millennia pressing in. The Egyptians believed the soul needed protection, and curses served as spiritual bodyguards. But whether these warnings were mystical or practical remains part of the debate. You can almost hear the desert wind sigh through the cracks in the stone, whispering ancient secrets. Just don't yawn too loudly. The Pharaoh's curse might be listening. You leave the golden sands of Egypt behind and step into the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, where kings once ruled under the watchful eyes of gods both merciful and merciless. Here, royal curses weren't just spooky warnings scrawled on walls. They were serious political tools, etched into clay tablets to protect entire cities and enforce power. You can almost picture a king, maybe in a finely woven robe, declaring a curse with the weight of divine authority, aiming to freeze treachery in its tracks. The Mesopotamian kings believed that invoking divine wrath through curses could safeguard their reigns and punish their enemies. One famous example comes from the Code of Hammurabi, where laws are backed by the threat of godly curses to ensure obedience. Imagine being a subject who accidentally breaks a law and then has to fear not just earthly punishment, but eternal curses from the gods themselves. Talk about an ancient version of "Don't make me call your mom." Interestingly, scholars still argue whether these curses functioned more as legal deterrents or genuine spiritual threats. Were people truly afraid of curses? Or was it all clever political theater? This debate colors much of what we understand about Mesopotamian governance and religion. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some Mesopotamian curses weren't just about people. They targeted places, objects, and even animals. There are records of curses laid upon fields to wither crops or on wells to poison water. This broad scope of curses illustrates a worldview where divine displeasure could reach every corner of life. And who wouldn't want a supernatural weapon to handle a nasty neighbor? And speaking of nasty neighbors, Mesopotamian kings also used curses to protect city walls and gates. Some tablets inscribed curses that would activate if enemies breached defenses. Basically, an ancient curse-based home security system. Whether any invader ever actually believed these threats, or if the curses scared off enemies, remains a question for historians. The linguistic beauty of these curses is fascinating too. Often poetic and formulaic, they combine precise legal language with fiery invocations to gods like Enlil and Ishtar. Imagine a scribe crafting curses meant to echo through time, hoping to bind future generations with fear and respect. Another fascinating detail lies in how curses were sometimes inscribed on statues or boundary stones marking sacred or royal lands. These physical tokens bore warnings that anyone crossing into forbidden territory would face dire consequences. It's like the ancient version of trespassers will be cursed. And here's a fringe yet captivating idea. Some historians propose that Mesopotamian curses might have been intentionally ambiguous, allowing rulers to wield flexible power. If someone defied a decree, a curse could be interpreted retroactively to justify harsh punishments or political purges. Historians still debate how much the curse texts were tools of manipulation versus genuine belief. In addition, there's evidence that curse tablets, known as namburbi, were used ritually to lift or transfer curses, showing a complex understanding of curses, not just as threats, but as magical forces to be managed. This suggests that curses in Mesopotamia were woven into daily life, law, and spirituality far more deeply than we often imagine. Finally, don't forget the role of scribes, the powerful gatekeepers of curses and laws. Their precise wording could mean the difference between a mild warning and a devastating divine curse. So maybe, just maybe, the real power was in their pens rather than the gods themselves. So as you stand amidst the ruins of ziggurats and palaces, the echoes of these royal curses hum through the dry air, reminding you that power in Mesopotamia was as much about divine mandate as sword and shield. You might want to keep an eye on your back. Those curses had a reputation for being remarkably persistent. You step back into the Egyptian desert, where the story of Tutankhamun the boy king still sends shivers down spines. In 1922, Howard Carter's discovery of Tut's tomb unleashed a wave of fascination and fear. You could almost hear the whispers echoing through the Valley of the Kings as the tomb's secrets emerged from centuries of silence. But alongside the treasures and golden death mask came tales of a deadly curse that targeted those who dared disturb the young pharaoh's eternal rest. The curse allegedly began with the death of Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy patron who financed Carter's expedition. After being bitten by a mosquito and succumbing to blood poisoning, the press quickly labeled it the Curse of the Pharaoh. Other members of the team soon faced strange illnesses, accidents, or early deaths, adding fuel to the legend. But historians still argue whether these incidents were mere coincidence, exacerbated by poor medical care and harsh conditions, or if there was something more sinister at work. A fascinating fringe fact is that some theorists believe that radiation naturally emitted from the tomb's minerals may have contributed to the ailments suffered by the team. It's not the classic supernatural curse, but it's an eerie scientific explanation that adds a modern twist to ancient mystery. Imagine opening a coffin only to find a slow, invisible poison waiting inside. The curse wasn't just limited to people. It became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring countless books, movies, and spooky campfire stories. The phrase "Curse of the Pharaohs" became synonymous with supernatural retribution, fueling the imagination of generations. But the ancient Egyptians themselves were less focused on curses as spooky bogeymen and more on protecting the sanctity of the tomb. Their inscriptions warned of divine wrath, but were grounded in religious respect and the sacredness of the burial site. Interestingly, some scholars point out that similar curses appear throughout Egyptian history, not just in royal tombs, but also in common graves, indicating a widespread cultural practice rather than a unique Tut curse. This suggests the curse was more about social order and respect for the dead than actual magic. Another quirky detail: some of the supposed victims of the curse lived long, healthy lives, which complicates the narrative. It's like the curse had a very selective hit list, or maybe it was more PR than power. Historians also debate if the curse was a marketing tool used by Carter's team to keep their discovery in the headlines. Beyond the sensational, consider the impact on Egyptian nationalism. The curse narrative sometimes overshadowed local perspectives on their own heritage. Some Egyptians viewed the excavation as a violation, and the curse stories fed into tensions about cultural respect and colonial exploitation. A complex historical layer rarely mentioned in tourist brochures. And here's a fascinating fringe angle. Several researchers found evidence of fungi in tombs that produce toxins harmful to humans, a sort of natural curse embedded in the environment. Could ancient Egyptians have known this and used warnings to protect their dead, or is it a modern scientific coincidence? Historians still argue whether these natural dangers contributed to the curse legend. Finally, the myth of Tut's curse is a perfect example of how history, media, and human psychology intertwine. It reveals our craving for mystery, the allure of forbidden secrets, and the way stories can take on a life of their own. So, as you gaze upon that iconic golden mask, remember that sometimes the most potent curses are the ones we create ourselves. Now you find yourself drifting into the realm of ancient Greece, where curses took on a tragic, almost theatrical form, haunting entire bloodlines for generations. The House of Atreus is a saga soaked in betrayal, murder, and supernatural vengeance. A family cursed by the gods, doomed to endless misery. You can almost hear the echoes of agonized screams in the marble halls of Mycenae as fate weaves its dark tapestry. The tale starts with Tantalus, who offended the gods with his hubris, and the curse began its slow burn through his descendants. His son Pelops, daughter Niobe, and grandson Atreus all suffered brutal fates, including murder, cannibalism, and betrayal. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect actual family tragedies or are purely allegorical tales meant to teach moral lessons. Here's a quirky tidbit. The curse of the house of Atreus inspired many Greek tragedies, like Aeschylus or Aestia, which blends mythology with commentary on justice and revenge. The way curses twist through generations shows the Greeks' fascination with fate and divine retribution, a concept still debated by scholars studying ancient ethics. But there's more. The idea of hereditary curses wasn't just mythic storytelling. Some historians speculate that these stories may echo real dynastic conflicts and blood feuds in Bronze Age Greece. The curses symbolized cycles of violence and retribution that plagued ruling families, making the tales as much political commentary as mythology. And here's a fringe theory. Some suggest that the curse metaphorically represents inherited psychological trauma, an ancient way of explaining patterns of madness or misfortune within families before the concept of genetics existed. Historians still debate whether these stories were early attempts at understanding mental illness. Adding another layer, archaeological digs at Mycenae have uncovered signs of violent deaths and mysterious destructions around the era linked with the legends, fueling speculation about the real-life origins of these myths. Could the curse have been a narrative mask for real historical bloodshed? Moreover, the theme of curses in Greek culture also serves to explore the tension between fate and free will. The tragic heroes of these stories struggle against their doomed destinies, provoking debates among ancient philosophers and modern scholars about the nature of justice and human agency. Another interesting detail is how the curse of Atreus is intertwined with sacred rituals and religious practices of the time. Certain rites and sacrifices were believed necessary to appease offended gods and break the cycle of vengeance, highlighting the cultural importance of ritual in managing misfortune. Finally, the House of Atreus shows how curses can serve as both warning and legacy. The idea that misdeeds of ancestors condemn future generations remains a powerful theme, still resonant in storytelling and psychology today. So as you wander through the ruins of ancient Greece, remember that curses aren't just spooky stories. Sometimes they're echoes of real pain and power struggles buried deep in history. You step into a world awash with sun-drenched temples and revolutionary ideas. The reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic king who dared upend centuries of tradition. Akhenaten's stories wrapped in religious upheaval and whispered curses. His radical devotion to the sun god often destabilized Egypt's age-old pantheon and might have sparked a curse that echoed through time. You can almost hear the murmurs of priests plotting in shadowed corridors, fearing the end of their sacred order. Akhenaten abandoned the worship of many gods, promoting monotheism in a culture steeped in polytheism. Historians still argue whether his reign truly ended in a curse, or if his fall was simply a political backlash. Some say the turmoil that followed his rule was the result of divine punishment. Others see it as the inevitable failure of a revolutionary vision clashing with entrenched power. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some archaeological evidence suggests that Akhenaten's radical art style, depicting the king with exaggerated features, may have reflected a genetic disorder, which fueled rumors that the gods themselves disapproved. Whether this was a curse, a biological fact, or royal propaganda remains a lively scholarly debate. And then there's the mysterious disappearance of Akhenaten's city Amarna, abandoned and left to the desert winds. Was it cursed or simply left behind as a failed experiment? The sand has swallowed many secrets, but the aura of doom lingers. Beyond the political and religious upheaval, fringe theories suggest that Akhenaten's supposed curse might be linked to his attempts to rewrite cosmic order, challenging the gods' invited chaos, or so the story goes. This concept fascinates scholars studying the power of belief and iconoclasm in ancient societies. There's also an interesting note about the fate of Akhenaten's family. His successor, Tutankhamun, notably restored the old gods, perhaps as a way to lift the curse and restore harmony. This restoration could be seen as an early example of political rebranding to counteract negative legacies. And while many texts from this period were destroyed or defaced, the surviving fragments hint at a society torn between old faith and new ideas, tension that might have made the idea of curses especially potent. Another fascinating detail: recent studies on the remains of Akhenaten and his family suggest evidence of genetic anomalies and diseases that may have plagued them, possibly reinforcing the idea that divine punishment manifested physically. Whether these findings confirm a curse or are just science catching up is still debated. Moreover, the religious reforms disrupted priestly power and temple economies, which some scholars argue led to political unrest that may have been retrospectively framed as a curse. The link between religion, politics, and social stability was fragile indeed. Finally, Akhenaten's radical reign and its mysterious aftermath remind us that curses often symbolize the fears and conflicts of their time, be it social upheaval, religious change, or personal tragedy. The curse might just be the story a culture tells itself when the old order crumbles. As you imagine the sun setting over the deserted ruins of Amarna, you wonder, was this king's curse a punishment, a legend, or simply the dust of forgotten dreams? Crossing into Renaissance Italy, you step into the glittering, ruthless world of the Medici Florence's infamous banking family, who wielded power like a sharpened dagger. Their name is synonymous with art, culture, and curses. Yes, curses, because for all their wealth and influence, whispers of doom clung to the Medici like a shadow, especially around the papal members of the family. The Medici popes Leo X and Clement V were often rumored to be under a curse that doomed their political ambitions and personal health. Historians still argue whether these stories were fueled by political enemies, or if there was a grain of truth to these misfortunes. Leo X's lavish lifestyle drained the papal coffers, while Clement VII faced disaster with the sack of Rome in 1527, an event some attributed to a divine curse. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Medici were said to have commissioned mysterious talismans and amulets believed to protect against curses and ill fate. Some of these objects, now housed in museums, feature intricate designs meant to ward off evil spirits. Whether these actually worked or were just fashionable accessories is up for debate, but they certainly add flair to the story. Moreover, some fringe historians suggest that the Medici's rise and fall are entwined with the curse of the Black Death, which had devastated Florence decades earlier. The curse, they say, was a spiritual reckoning for profiting off chaos and death, a poetic, if grim, interpretation. Another layer is the fierce rivalry and vendettas within Florence's elite circles. Some believe that curses were used as psychological warfare propaganda tools to destabilize opponents. Historians still debate how much of the Medici curse is genuine superstition versus political smear. And don't forget the Medici's patronage of artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli. It's ironic that a family supposedly cursed helped birth the Renaissance's greatest masterpieces, showing how curses and creativity often dance a complicated tango. There's also an interesting note about the Medici chapel in Florence. It's said that some cryptic inscriptions within hint at the family's awareness of their troubled fate, almost a public acknowledgement of curses they felt powerless to escape. Additionally, the sudden deaths and assassinations of several Medici members, such as Giuliano de' Medici, during the Pazzi conspiracy fueled beliefs that the family was marked by a curse of violent demise. The intertwining of political betrayal and perceived curses illustrates how superstition and history often blur. Curiously, some Medici tombs feature unusual iconography, with images of saints and symbols designed specifically to ward off evil, indicating a deep-seated fear of supernatural harm. Whether these were effective or merely psychological comfort is a debate among scholars. Finally, the Medici saga shows how curses serve as narratives to explain the rise and fall of power, mixing fact, folklore, and human fear into a compelling story that still captivates today. The Medici story reminds you that curses often mirror human ambition, fear, and the fragile nature of power. Even the most powerful families are not immune to whispers of fate. As you stroll through the ornate halls of Florence, imagine the weight of centuries pressing down where art, power, and curses collide in a dazzling, dangerous mix. Now you find yourself in the vibrant, tumultuous world of Haiti, where royal curses blend with mysticism, voodoo, and the fierce spirit of the Haitian people. The kingdom of the Bois Caiman and the legendary voodoo kings wielded spiritual power that was said to protect their people and punish enemies with curses that echoed in both myth and reality. You can almost hear the rhythmic drumming and chant of priests calling down forces beyond human reckoning. Haitian royalty and voodoo practitioners believed that curses could serve as both protection and retribution. These curses were invoked to defend territory, avenge wrongs, or maintain social order. Historians still argue whether these curses were purely spiritual or also served political and social functions, blending belief with governance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some voodoo curses involved the use of symbolic objects called grease amulets believed to hold protective magic. These objects were often decorated with intricate designs and secret symbols, making them both personal and powerful. Anthropologists still debate the extent to which these objects held real influence versus their role in social cohesion. The Haitian Revolution itself is often wrapped in tales of curses and mystical protections. Some stories suggest that the success of the revolution was due in part to powerful spiritual forces unleashed by voodoo priests, placing curses on colonial oppressors. Whether these curses had real power or were psychological tools of resistance remains a subject of lively scholarly debate. Another fascinating angle is the fusion of African spiritual traditions with Catholicism, creating a unique belief system where curses could cross religious boundaries. This syncretism complicated how curses were perceived and practiced, with some priests blending Christian prayers with voodoo rites. Fringe theories also suggest that curses played a role in shaping Haiti's political instability throughout history. Some believe that political leaders used curse lore to intimidate rivals or legitimize their rule, turning spiritual belief into political leverage. There's also an interesting note about how curses in Haitian culture often focus on community and balance rather than individual doom, reflecting a worldview that connects spiritual well-being with social harmony. Additionally, Some voodoo practitioners employed curses not just for harm, but also for healing and justice, blurring the lines between good and evil intentions in spiritual practice. This duality makes Haitian curses complex social instruments rather than simple supernatural threats. Another curious detail: Haitian curses are sometimes linked to zombie powders, substances rumored to bring about states of suspended life. While largely mythologized, these practices add a chilling physical dimension to the concept of curses, reinforcing fear and respect. Finally, Haitian curses are deeply tied to oral tradition, with stories passed down through generations, making them living narratives that evolve with the people. This dynamic nature keeps the curses relevant and powerful in cultural memory. As you walk through the streets of Port-au-Prince, feel the pulse of a culture where curses aren't just superstition. They're woven into identity, survival, and the enduring fight for freedom. You shift your gaze to the rugged highlands of Scotland, where the stone of destiny rests, a relic steeped in royal power and whispered curses. This ancient symbol of sovereignty, used for centuries to crown Scottish kings, is said to carry a curse that dooms anyone who dares move or steal it. You can almost feel the chill in the air as you imagine those who tried and failed to tamper with this sacred stone. The stone's history is a mix of myth, politics, and mystery. It was seized by English kings and kept in Westminster Abbey for centuries before Scottish nationalists famously reclaimed it in 1950. The legend says that disturbing the stone would bring disaster upon the thief and their kingdom. Historians still argue about the stone's true origins and the validity of the curse attached to it. Here's a quirky tidbit. The stone itself is made of a type of sandstone called Lower Old Red Sandstone, quarried from the region of Scone in Scotland. It's not as glamorous as one might expect, yet its symbolic power is immense. Some even speculate that it might have been a part of an ancient pagan altar before becoming a royal artifact. Beyond the curse, the Stone of Destiny represents the complex relationship between Scotland and England, a tug of war marked by politics, identity, and cultural pride. The curse seems to echo this tension, as if the stone's power is tied to the land's very soul. Fringe theories propose that the stone might be older than currently believed, perhaps linked to biblical lore or Celtic mythology, further adding to its mystique. These ideas aren't universally accepted, but they fuel the stone's enigmatic aura. Interestingly, those involved in the 1950 theft reportedly faced accidents and misfortunes, which some attribute to the curse's lingering power. Skeptics argue these were coincidences, but believers remain convinced. Another fascinating aspect is how the stone's presence at coronations continues to evoke ritualistic reverence, blending ancient tradition with modern ceremony. This ongoing use keeps the curse's legend alive in the public imagination. Moreover, local folklore says the stone has the power to protect the kingdom when it's in the hands of rightful rulers. Removing it too long is said to invite chaos and misfortune, which might explain some historical upheavals tied to Scotland's sovereignty struggles. Adding to the mystery, some accounts mention a false stone swapped during the stone's removal to England, implying the real stone remains hidden, still guarding its secrets. Historians still debate this legend, fueling further speculation. There is also an intriguing connection between the Stone of Destiny and the legendary King Arthur's sword, Excalibur, with some legends suggesting this stone may have once been part of a sacred seat where kings were divinely chosen. While no concrete evidence supports this, it adds another layer of mythos surrounding the stone's importance. Furthermore, The Stone of Destiny has inspired modern political movements and cultural revivals, becoming a symbol for Scottish independence and national pride, showing how ancient curses can evolve into contemporary symbols of identity. You realize that the Stone of Destiny is more than just a rock. It's a symbol of power, identity, and the mysterious forces that bind people to their history. Touch it, and you might just awaken the curse yourself. Now, you step into the shadowed courts of the Habsburg dynasty, a family whose very jawline sparked tales of a royal curse. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a pronounced protrusion caused by generations of intermarriage, became a physical symbol of their supposed hereditary curse. You can almost picture the stern faces of emperors and archdukes, their distinctive features a visible mark of the family's tangled legacy. Historians still argue whether the so-called Habsburg curse was purely genetic misfortune, or if the family's string of political and military failures fueled rumors of supernatural punishment. The dynasty ruled vast swaths of Europe for centuries, yet misfortunes, assassinations, military defeats, and sudden deaths plagued them relentlessly. A quirky tidbit, the Habsburg jaw was so prominent it even affected the way some rulers spoke and ate, adding an oddly humanizing, if tragic, detail to the story of imperial power. Some anthropologists suggest this genetic trait was a consequence of repeated cousin marriages meant to preserve royal bloodlines. Beyond genetics, the Habsburgs were believed to carry a curse tied to their divine right to rule. It was said that their stubborn adherence to tradition and refusal to adapt invited doom, a poetic justice woven into the fabric of European history. This idea remains a subject of lively scholarly debate. Fringe theories suggest that the curse symbolized the unsustainability of ruling through isolation and inbreeding, serving as an early metaphor for the dangers of concentrating power too narrowly. This adds a fascinating psychological dimension to the tale. Interestingly, several Habsburg rulers met violent ends, like Emperor Maximilian I and Charles III of Spain, further fueling the legend of a fatal family fate. The combination of personal tragedy and political upheaval reinforced the narrative of an unstoppable curse. Adding to the mystique, the Habsburgs were patrons of the arts and culture, commissioning magnificent palaces and works that still awe visitors today. This juxtaposition of grandiosity and fragility creates a compelling story of human ambition and vulnerability. There's also a curious tale about the Habsburg lip being linked to increased susceptibility to illnesses, perhaps contributing to the dynasty's decline. Scientists and historians still debate how much the physical trait impacted the family's fate. Moreover, the Habsburgs' legacy continues to influence popular culture, from historical novels to movies, perpetuating the myth of a cursed lineage unable to escape its past. In addition, there is evidence that the family's genetic issues may have contributed to mental illnesses among certain members, which historians argue might explain some erratic decisions and instability. This medical perspective adds a new dimension to the curse legend. Also worth noting is how the Habsburg marriage strategies, designed to keep power consolidated, ironically sowed seeds of decline through diminished genetic diversity, serving as a cautionary tale on the risks of dynastic insularity. Lastly, the Habsburg curse narrative reminds us that the intertwining of biology, politics, and fate creates stories as tragic as any myth, where the burdens of power are etched, not only in history books, but in the very bodies of rulers. So, as you wander through the sprawling Habsburg palaces, imagine the weight of a family burdened by genetics, fate, and history. a royal curse writ large in flesh and fortune. You journey now to the mist-covered islands of New Zealand, home of Mbori kings leaders whose authority is wrapped in ancestral mana and spiritual protection. The Mbori believed that their kings and chiefs were safeguarded by powerful curses, or rahui, placed to protect tribal lands and maintain the delicate balance between the living and the spirit world. You can almost hear the haunting chants echoing through the forests as guardians watch silently. The Mbori royal curses were not mere threats, but sacred rituals invoked to preserve tapu, or spiritual sanctity, over certain places or people. Historians still debate the extent to which these curses functioned as social control mechanisms versus genuine spiritual protections. A quirky tidbit: some rahui were imposed not just on people, but on entire areas like fishing grounds or forests, restricting access for periods to allow resources to regenerate. Breaking these curses wasn't just disrespectful. It was believed to bring misfortune and illness. Fringe scholars suggest that rahui played a political role in asserting Mbori authority during periods of colonial encroachment, blending spiritual belief with resistance. This complex interplay of power and faith continues to be studied and debated. There's also an interesting note on how these curses intersect with the Mbori concept of Wakapapa, the genealogy, connecting individuals to ancestors and land-making curses deeply personal as well as communal. In some cases, curses were believed to manifest physically, causing illness or accidents to violators, blurring the lines between spiritual belief and observed consequences. Historians still argue how much of this was faith-driven versus coincidental. Another fascinating angle is the role of Tohunga Mbori priests, who were responsible for invoking and lifting curses, acting as mediators between the spiritual and physical worlds. Their authority reinforced the power of the curse and its social implications. There's also the modern revival of Mbori traditions, where rahui are respected for environmental and cultural reasons, showing how ancient curses have evolved into tools for sustainability and identity. Adding further complexity, some rahui were combined with karakia prayers and incantations, highlighting the intricate spiritual ceremonies that accompanied curses. These rituals reinforced communal respect and fear, maintaining social order through sacred tradition. Moreover, during New Zealand's colonial history, the misuse or misunderstanding of these curses by European settlers led to conflicts and cultural suppression, a painful chapter that scholars continue to examine for its lasting impact on Mbori society. Finally, the persistence of rahui in contemporary times applied to protect endangered species or sacred sites demonstrates how ancient curse concepts have transformed into meaningful expressions of environmental stewardship and cultural resilience. As you stand in the verdant forests of Aotearoa, you sense the enduring power of these curses, not as mere superstition, but as living threads connecting past, present, and future. You cross oceans and centuries to the cold palaces of Russia, where the tragic fate of the Romanovs still casts a long shadow. The last royal family of Russia, executed in the bloody aftermath of revolution, is surrounded by stories of curses that haunted their downfall and the fate of their descendants. You can almost hear the winter winds whistle through the shattered windows of the Ipativ house, carrying whispers of doom and despair. The Romanov curse, as it is sometimes called, is said to have begun generations before the revolution, possibly linked to a family feud or political enemies, invoking dark forces to end their reign. Historians still argue whether these curse stories are genuine folklore, political propaganda, or a tragic coincidence amplified by history. A quirky tidbit. Rumors suggest that Grigory Rasputin, the mystic who gained influence over the Romanov family, cursed the dynasty before his assassination, vowing that if he died, the family would follow soon after. Whether this was an actual curse or simply Rasputin's dramatic flair remains a point of debate. Moreover, the mystique surrounding the Romanov curse was fueled by the mysterious survival claims of Anastasia and other family members, adding layers of legend to tragedy. The idea of a curse kept hope alive, even as reality suggested otherwise. Fringe theories speculate that the Romanov curse was linked to political unrest and social upheaval rather than supernatural forces. Scholars continue to study how myth and history intertwine in this dramatic narrative. There's also an interesting note on the role of the Russian Orthodox Church, which canonized the Romanovs as martyrs, transforming the curse narrative into one of sanctity and sacrifice. Furthermore, the legacy of the curse extends beyond Russia, influencing popular culture worldwide, from novels to films showing how royal curses can captivate imaginations across borders. Some historians argue that the so-called curse served as a metaphor for the inevitable collapse of autocracy in the face of modernity and revolution, blending spiritual belief with political analysis. Adding to the depth, the Romanov family was also subject to a mysterious set of relics and icons, believed to carry protective power and possibly curses if mishandled. These sacred objects were thought to be linked to the family's divine right and fate. Another intriguing point is the continued fascination with Romanov descendants and impostors over the years, reflecting society's complex relationship with royal legacies and curses, where myth and identity intertwine. The Romanov curse reminds you that the line between history and legend can blur in tragic ways, leaving behind stories that haunt collective memory. As you imagine the frostbitten streets of early 20th century Russia, the Romanov curse whispers warnings about power, fate, and the costs of imperial rule. You now cross into the sun-baked lands of the Aztecs, where emperors ruled with divine authority, and their curses were as fierce as the jaguar warriors who guarded them. The Aztec emperor's curse was said to doom invaders who dared disturb the sacred order, a powerful spiritual weapon wielded through priests and rituals. You can almost feel the heat of the fiery temples and hear the haunting chants, calling upon gods like Huitzilopochtli to protect their empire. The Aztecs believed that their emperors were intermediaries between gods and humans, and breaking their sacred laws or disrespecting rulers invited catastrophic curses. Historians still argue how much of these curses were intended as spiritual protection and how much were tools of political control. A quirky tidbit: Aztec priests used ritual bloodletting and human sacrifice as means to appease the gods and maintain cosmic balance, which could be seen as a form of curse management, keeping divine wrath at bay by offering gifts of life. This practice is both fascinating and horrifying to modern eyes. Fringe theories suggest that some of the curses attributed to Aztec rulers may have been psychological warfare, intimidating enemies with stories of supernatural retribution. Scholars debate the extent to which these beliefs influenced Aztec warfare and diplomacy. There's also an interesting note on the Spanish conquest. When Hernán Cortés and his men arrived, they too became victims of what some describe as Aztec curses, including strange illnesses and fierce resistance fueled by spiritual fervor. Whether these were actual curses or consequences of war remains debated. Moreover, the Aztec calendar and prophecies often foretold doom and rebirth, blending the idea of curses with cyclical time and fate a concept still studied by anthropologists and historians. Another fascinating aspect is how modern Mexican culture preserves some of these ancient beliefs in subtle ways, blending indigenous spirituality with Catholicism, showing the lasting legacy of Aztec curses in contemporary life. In addition, certain archaeological sites have revealed inscriptions warning grave robbers and enemies with curses promising divine punishment, a clear message that the Aztecs used curses to protect their treasures and sacred spaces. Adding further intrigue, some Aztec myths tell of emperors invoking curses to protect their cities from natural disasters, suggesting that curses also function as explanations for environmental catastrophes. Historians still debate whether these beliefs helped maintain social cohesion during crises. Also, the use of Nahual's shapeshifters believed to carry spiritual power adds a mystical layer to Aztec curses, where certain individuals were thought to be able to wield or break curses, showing the complexity of their magical system. Finally, the Aztec Emperor's Curse embodies a complex system of belief where spirituality, politics, and warfare intertwine, reminding you that curses can be as much about power and control as about fear. As you imagine the towering pyramids and vibrant markets of the Aztec Empire, remember that beneath the gold and blood lay a world where curses shaped destiny and history. You travel eastward to ancient China, standing before the colossal tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor who united the warring states into a single empire. His burial site is legendary, filled with mysteries, deadly traps, and whispers of curses so potent they have kept treasure hunters and archaeologists at bay for centuries. You can almost hear the clatter of thousands of terracotta warriors standing guard, silent sentinels protecting the emperor's eternal rest. The curse of Qin Shi Huang is said to punish anyone who dares to enter his tomb or disturb his final resting place. Historians still argue whether the warnings and legends about deadly traps and supernatural consequences are exaggerations or rooted in ancient protective rituals. The tomb's vast underground palace reportedly contains mercury rivers and complex mechanisms designed to deter intruders, a mixture of science and superstition. A quirky tidbit: modern surveys have detected unusually high levels of mercury in the area, lending some truth to the stories of toxic protection. Imagine a tomb not just guarded by soldiers, but by actual poisonous elements. This blend of ancient technology and spiritual protection fascinates scientists and historians alike. Fringe theories claim that Qin's curse extends beyond physical dangers, involving spirits and cosmic forces invoked to defend the emperor's legacy. Scholars debate the role of Taoist and other esoteric beliefs in shaping these protective curses. There is also an interesting note on the terracotta army itself, numbering over 8,000 figures, each unique, believed to protect the emperor in the afterlife. These warriors symbolize the emperor's quest for immortality, with curses serving as metaphysical defenses. Another fascinating aspect is how the tomb's layout mimics the emperor's capital, Qin Shi Huangdi Xianyang, reflecting his desire for eternal control, and the curse can be seen as an extension of this obsessive power. Additionally, stories warn that anyone who enters the tomb without proper ritual observance risks angering the emperor's spirit. Whether these tales are genuine ancient beliefs or modern inventions remains a lively topic among scholars. Moreover, recent archaeological ethics debates focus on whether the tomb should remain unopened to preserve these curses and the integrity of the site, showing how the curse influences modern decision-making. Interestingly, there are records of ancient texts suggesting that Qin Shi Huang consulted astrologers and magicians to fortify his tomb with cosmic protections, blending astronomy and mysticism in his quest for eternal safeguarding. Also, some local legends claim that the site is haunted by the emperor's restless spirit, with accounts of unexplained phenomena around the tomb, keeping curiosity seekers wary. Finally, the curse of Qin Shi Huang reminds you that the pursuit of immortality often invites both awe and fear, where earthly power and supernatural threats entwine. As you imagine the silent ranks of terracotta soldiers standing eternally vigilant, you sense a legacy guarded by both stone and spirit. You find yourself transported to medieval England, peering through the heavy mist surrounding the Tower of London, where the infamous story of the English princes in the Tower unfolds. The mystery of Edward V and his brother Richard, who disappeared without a trace, is cloaked in whispers of royal curses and betrayal. You can almost hear the echoes of ghostly footsteps down shadowed corridors, and feel the chill of centuries-old secrets pressing against cold stone walls. The princes were placed in the tower by their uncle, Richard III, amid political turmoil, and their disappearance sparked rumors of murder and a curse that would haunt the English monarchy. Historians still argue whether Richard III was guilty or a convenient scapegoat, and whether the curse was real or born from popular fear and political propaganda. A quirky tidbit: some versions of the curse suggest that the deaths of the princes unleashed a doom upon Richard III himself, who died in battle only 2 years later, fulfilling a grim prophecy. This intertwining of fate and curse feeds into the narrative of poetic justice that permeates English history. Fringe theories speculate that the curse extended beyond the tower, affecting subsequent monarchs and political events, though this remains a debated point among scholars. There's also an interesting note on the tower's role as a royal fortress, prison and execution site places inherently associated with fear and power, which helped nurture legends of curses and hauntings. Moreover, the rediscovery of skeletal remains believed to be those of the princes in 1674 added fuel to the curse legend, though scientific analysis and identification debates continue. Another layer of intrigue is the claim that Sir Thomas More, writing about the princes, may have contributed to spreading the curse narrative through his dramatic accounts, shaping historical and popular perception. Additionally, some folklorists suggest that the tower's reputation for ghostly apparitions of the princes helped keep the curse alive in English culture, a haunting presence in literature and tourism. Some historians argue that the curse served as a moral lesson against the ruthless political tactics of the era, warning future rulers about the consequences of ambition unchecked by conscience. Further adding to the legend, Tudor propaganda art and literature portrayed Richard III as a villain cursed by divine justice, reinforcing the curse narrative for centuries. There's also a lesser-known tale about a medieval monk who supposedly foretold the prince's fate, warning of a curse that would haunt the royal bloodline unless justice was served. Intriguingly, the tower's infamous ravens are said to be guardians against the curse's full power. Legend says if the ravens ever leave, the kingdom will fall. This superstition has inspired conservation efforts and adds another eerie layer to the site. Moreover, the tower's history as a royal menagerie and torture site feeds into the dark ambience that sustains tales of curses and restless spirits, making it a nexus of fear and fascination. Finally, the mystery and curse of the princes in the tower remind you how history, myth, and legend can intertwine, leaving a lasting shadow over both people and places. As you imagine the narrow staircases and dark chambers of the tower, you sense a presence, an unspoken warning etched into the stones themselves. You cross over to the dark hills of medieval Scotland, where the infamous Black Dinner took place, a grim feast steeped in betrayal, blood, and curses that have echoed through the centuries. Imagine the grand hall in Edinburgh Castle, the flicker of torchlight casting long shadows over the assembled nobles, and the sudden, chilling silence as the heads of the young Douglas brothers were severed after a dinner meant to secure peace. The Black Dinner's curse is said to have cursed not only those present, but the entire noble house for generations. Historians still argue whether the Black Dinner was a political ploy gone horribly wrong, or a calculated act of terror designed to break the power of a rival clan. The curse narrative, however, was born out of the shock and horror that gripped Scotland after the event. A quirky tidbit: the Black Dinner is often cited as inspiration for scenes in modern fantasy literature and television, highlighting how curses and historical tragedies continue to fuel storytelling today. Fringe theories suggest that the curse extended beyond the immediate victims, allegedly causing misfortune and death among the attending nobles and their descendants, a point that remains debated by scholars. The Black Dinner's setting, the Great Hall of Edinburgh Castle, with its grim history of imprisonments and executions, only amplifies the legend's eerie atmosphere. Interestingly, the curse is said to have been pronounced by the youthful victims themselves, who are believed to have called down divine retribution on their killers. Whether this was real or later embellishment is uncertain, but adds a poignant twist to the tale. Moreover, the political aftermath of the Black Dinner reshaped Scotland's noble landscape, with some families rising and others falling, giving weight to the idea that curses can be as much about power shifts as spiritual vengeance. The story also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of treachery and broken trust, themes common in medieval lore and still relevant today. There's an intriguing note on how the Black Dinner was memorialized in Scottish folklore and ballads, ensuring the curse remained alive in cultural memory. Further adding to the chilling legacy, some historians speculate that the ritualistic nature of the dinner, with the symbolic placing of a black bull's head on the table, was a deliberate invocation of a curse meant to condemn the Douglases. The Black Dinner has also been linked to the wider context of clan rivalries and the brutal politics of Scotland, where curses and omens played key roles in shaping allegiances and fears. Another curious detail is how some chroniclers of the time described supernatural phenomena on the night of the Black Dinner, strange shadows and sudden cold spots, adding fuel to the curse's supernatural reputation. In addition, some modern-day Scottish traditions hold commemorative ceremonies acknowledging the tragic event, showing how the curse remains woven into national identity and history. Finally, the Black Dinner curse reminds you that history's darkest moments often birth legends that blend fact and fear, shaping identities and narratives for centuries. As you picture the heavy oak doors closing behind the doomed guests, you feel the cold grip of a curse still lingering in the stones. You step into the shadow of one of history's most ambitious yet ill-fated military campaigns, Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian expedition. As the French army marched into the land of the pharaohs, they were met not only with desert heat and foreign foes, but also with whispers of curses and divine wrath that seemed to haunt their every step. You can almost feel the weight of ancient history pressing down as the Nile winds whisper of doom. Napoleon's campaign was a mixture of military strategy, scientific exploration, and cultural fascination. But the so-called Curse of Egypt was never far behind. Historians still debate whether these curses were genuine fears or part of the exotic mystique Napoleon's troops encountered, and sometimes believed. A quirky tidbit: Napoleon brought along scholars and scientists to study Egypt, leading to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, a treasure that helped decode ancient scripts, but ironically came from a land wrapped in curses. It's a neat twist that knowledge emerged from a land feared for its supernatural dangers. Fringe theories suggest that some of Napoleon's misfortunes in Egypt, from disease outbreaks to military setbacks, were blamed on ancient curses or the anger of the gods, though many scholars attribute these to logistics and climate challenges. There's also an interesting note on how local Egyptian religious figures might have used the idea of curses as psychological resistance against foreign invaders, blending faith with subtle defiance. The legend of the curse fed into European fascination with Egyptology, influencing art, literature, and the occult during the 19th century, a phenomenon historians call Egyptomania. Moreover, Napoleon's retreat from Egypt was marked by mysterious illnesses and political turmoil, events some attributed to the curse's lingering effects, though historians stress practical causes. Another fascinating aspect is how the French campaign inadvertently sparked nationalist feelings in Egypt, with curses becoming symbolic of resistance to foreign domination. Adding to the lore, some accounts tell of soldiers who claimed to see ghostly figures or hear ominous sounds near ancient temples, fueling the curse narrative among the troops. Interestingly, the use of ancient Egyptian symbolism by Napoleon's forces in their propaganda was a double-edged sword. While it aimed to legitimize their presence, it also stirred local fears of desecration and supernatural backlash. There's also a lesser-known episode where Napoleon reportedly expressed concern over bad omens during his campaign, reflecting how even the great general was not immune to the psychological weight of curses and superstition. Additionally, the expedition's failure led to the rise of British power in Egypt, which some locals believed was part of a divine punishment, a historical twist that feeds the curses narrative even today. Finally, Napoleon's Egyptian campaign shows how curses can embody cultural clashes, where ancient beliefs meet modern ambitions, creating legends that outlive their origins. As you imagine the desert sun setting over ancient ruins, you feel the blend of awe and fear that shaped one of history's most legendary expeditions. You now step into the opulent yet haunted world of the Ottoman sultans, where the grandeur of the empire is shadowed by tales of phantom curses and restless spirits haunting the Topkapi Palace. You can almost hear the whispered warnings echoing through the marble halls, and the faint footsteps of jinn said to wander the palace at night, guarding secrets no mortal should uncover. The Ottomans, like many royal families, were believed to be under supernatural protections and curses that maintained the balance of power. Historians still argue whether these stories were genuine spiritual beliefs or political tools, designed to consolidate authority and intimidate rivals. A quirky tidbit: the palace is said to be protected by a mysterious sultan's curse, an invisible force that punishes anyone who dares to harm the dynasty or disrespect sacred traditions. Some palace guards reportedly refused certain posts, fearing the curse's wrath. Fringe theories suggest that some sultans employed occult practices and astrology to foresee and perhaps manipulate their fates, blurring the lines between superstition and governance. There's also an interesting note on the role of the harem, often depicted as a place of intrigue and mystery, where whispered curses and spiritual rituals were believed to influence the sultan's fortune and the empire's destiny. The fall of the Ottoman Empire is sometimes attributed by popular lore to curses placed on the dynasty, symbolizing the inevitable decline of imperial power and divine judgment. Scholars debate the validity and origins of these beliefs. Moreover, stories tell of mysterious illnesses and sudden deaths among the sultans, which some attributed to curses rather than natural causes, feeding legends that still captivate. Another fascinating aspect is the continued belief among locals that the spirits of past sultans linger in the palace grounds, protecting their legacy or seeking justice. In addition, the famous Curse of the Tulip era, a period of cultural bloom and political instability, reflects how curses can be metaphorical, representing societal anxieties during times of change. Furthermore, Ottoman architectural symbolism incorporated protective motifs intended to ward off evil and curses, a blend of art and spiritual safeguard. Some accounts mention secret rituals performed by palace mystics to cleanse curses or ward off misfortune, highlighting the intersection of faith and politics in Ottoman rule. An intriguing layer is the complex relationship between the sultans and dervishes, mystics who were both feared and revered, believed to possess the power to bless or curse, impacting political decisions and court intrigues. Additionally, there are tales of enchanted objects and talismans hidden within the palace walls, thought to house protective curses or jinxes, adding an aura of supernatural defense. Finally, the phantom curse of the Ottoman sultans reminds you that empires rise and fall under the watchful eyes of history, myth, and the unseen forces people believe in. As you imagine the ornate chambers of Topkapi at twilight, you feel the lingering breath of ancient curses woven into the empire's grand tapestry. You drift south to the lush islands of Hawaii, where the ancient monarchs ruled with sacred authority, and the mana, the spiritual energy, of their lands was fiercely protected by curses whispered among the palm trees. These royal curses were not mere superstition. They were profound spiritual safeguards woven into the very fabric of Hawaiian society. You can almost hear the crashing waves and feel the sacredness of the volcanic soil beneath your feet. Hawaiian monarchs were believed to wield spiritual power that, when dishonored, could unleash curses upon those who disrespected the land, the people, or the sacred Kapi laws. Historians still debate the exact nature of these curses and how they influenced political and social life in the islands. A quirky tidbit: some Kapi violations, breaches of sacred laws, were said to provoke instant curses, causing illness or misfortune, and even leading to social exile. This strict spiritual code helped maintain order in a deeply interconnected society. Fringe theories suggest that curses were also used strategically by monarchs to suppress dissent and consolidate power, blending religious belief with political control. This dual role of curses continues to intrigue scholars. There's also an interesting note on the role of kahuna, the priestly class, who were responsible for invoking, interpreting, and lifting curses, acting as spiritual intermediaries between gods and mortals. Moreover, the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in the late 19th century is sometimes viewed through the lens of broken sacred bonds and resultant curses that some believe still linger. This perspective adds a spiritual dimension to the island's complex history. Another fascinating aspect is how Hawaiian curses are closely tied to the natural world. Volcanoes, ocean, and winds are seen as both sources of power and potential agents of divine retribution. Additionally, traditional Hawaiian chants and prayers often contain warnings and calls for protection against curses, illustrating the deep cultural integration of these beliefs. There are also legends of cursed royal treasures objects, imbued with mana that could bring fortune or ruin, depending on the wielder's respect for tradition. Furthermore, the Hawaiian concept of pono, or righteousness, is central to understanding curses as a mechanism for maintaining balance and harmony. Some modern Hawaiians continue to honor these traditions, believing that respecting ancestral curses is vital for the well-being of the land and community. Adding to this spiritual tapestry, certain sacred sites in Hawaii are believed to be imbued with curse energy, places where violations of kapu laws risk immediate supernatural punishment, underscoring the importance of respect for tradition. Local legends also tell of mysterious illnesses and misfortunes that befell those who disrespected royal protocol, reinforcing the idea that curses serve both as spiritual warnings and social enforcement. Finally, as you walk along the volcanic coastlines, you sense a powerful spiritual presence, where curses are not just threats, but guardians of a sacred heritage, binding past, present, and future in an unbroken chain. You now journey to the towering Andes, home to the mighty Inca Empire, where the gold of the kings was said to be cursed, carrying doom for any who dared to steal or disrespect it. The cursed gold of the Inca kings is more than just treasure. It's a symbol of divine power, ancestral connection, and a legacy wrapped in warnings and supernatural retribution. You can almost feel the cold mountain winds whispering tales of greed, punished, and sacred laws upheld. The Incas believed their gold was the sweat of the sun god Inti, and to disturb was to invite his wrath. Historians still debate how much these curses were literal beliefs versus metaphorical warnings to protect precious resources from theft. A quirky tidbit: when the Spanish conquistadors looted Inca treasures, many fell ill or died mysteriously soon after, fueling legends that the gold was cursed. Some modern researchers speculate that these misfortunes may have had medical explanations, but the curse stories remain compelling. Fringe theories suggest that curses were also a psychological weapon against invaders, used by the Incas to intimidate and demoralize enemies. Scholars continue to analyze the interplay of belief and power in these narratives. There's also an interesting note on how some Inca rulers employed shamans to cast protective spells and curses over their treasures, blending spiritual practice with royal authority. Moreover, the lost city of Machu Picchu itself is surrounded by myths of curses protecting the sacred site, deterring explorers and treasure hunters alike. Another fascinating aspect is how modern Peruvians honor these ancestral beliefs, seeing the curses as part of a spiritual connection to their heritage rather than mere superstition. In addition, certain artifacts recovered from Inca sites bear inscriptions or symbols interpreted as warnings or curses, providing clues to the importance of sacred protection. Furthermore, the concept of any reciprocity and balance is central to understanding Inca curses as mechanisms for maintaining harmony between humans, nature, and the divine. Some anthropologists note that curses served social functions, reinforcing communal values and deterring exploitation during times of political upheaval. Interestingly, Inca oral traditions describe how the spirits of ancestors watch over the gold, ready to curse those who disrespect their legacy, blending memory with supernatural justice. There's also a lesser-known tale of an Inca gold mask said to bring misfortune to any who possess it without proper rites, illustrating the intimate connection between objects and spiritual power. Finally, the cursed gold of the Inca kings reminds you that treasure can be both a blessing and a burden, wrapped in stories that warn of the consequences of greed and disrespect. As you stand atop the Andes, overlooking ancient stone terraces, you feel the weight of history and the echo of curses guarding a vanished empire. You step into the shadowy court of France's infamous House of Bourbon, where royal curses and tragic destinies entwine like thorny vines around the palace walls of Versailles. The Bourbon kings and queens, dazzling in their splendor, were also haunted by whispers of curses that seemed to foreshadow their fall from grace. You can almost hear the rustle of silk gowns and the murmur of courtiers carrying dark tales of doom. The curse of the Bourbons is often linked to the turbulent reign of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, whose monarchy crumbled amidst revolution and bloodshed. Historians still argue whether this curse was a genuine belief among contemporaries or a post-revolutionary myth crafted to explain the sudden collapse of centuries-old rule. A quirky tidbit: Marie Antoinette was said to have been warned by fortune-tellers of her tragic fate, fueling rumors of a curse that followed the royal family. Whether these warnings were real or later inventions remains a topic of debate. Fringe theories suggest that the Bourbon curse may have been tied to political and social tensions, with curses serving as metaphors for inevitable change rather than literal supernatural forces. There's also an interesting note on the symbolism of the French royal fleur-de-lis, believed to carry protective powers, but perhaps powerless against the tides of revolution. Moreover, the dramatic execution of the royal family reinforced the idea of a curse, a fall from divine favor to mortal punishment that resonated deeply in European consciousness. Another fascinating aspect is how the Bourbon curse influenced literature and art, inspiring tragic portrayals of royalty doomed by fate, adding to the mythos. In addition, some contemporaries believed that the lavish excesses of the court invited divine wrath, a moralistic interpretation reflected in curse narratives. Furthermore, the restoration of the monarchy post-revolution was seen by some as an attempt to lift the curse, though political instability continued. Some scholars argue that curses in this context served as social critiques, warning against tyranny and hubris rather than literal threats. Adding to the depth, letters and memoirs from the era occasionally mention fears of curses and divine punishment, showing how pervasive such beliefs were even among the elite. There's also a lesser-known episode where clergy members performed special rites intended to protect the monarchy from misfortune, blending religion and superstition. Intriguingly, Marie Antoinette's famous diamond necklace scandal was viewed by some as a catalyst that deepened the Bourbon curse, symbolizing moral decay and foreshadowing downfall. Moreover, rumors circulated that secret societies within France believed the Bourbons were doomed, and that occult forces worked to hasten their demise, a fringe belief fueling revolutionary fervor. Finally, the Bourbon curse reminds you how royal destinies can become symbols of national trauma and transformation. As you imagine the opulent halls of Versailles echoing with whispers of power and downfall, you feel the weight of a curse that shaped a nation's history. You now find yourself in the intricate courts of the Mughal Empire, where emperors like Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb wielded immense power but also faced whispers of curses that haunted their reigns and legacies. The tales surrounding these rulers are entwined with grandeur and tragedy, where divine displeasure was believed to manifest as misfortune and downfall. You could almost feel the tension in the marble halls of the Taj Mahal, echoing with secrets and somber warnings. The Mughal royal curses were often tied to personal hubris, political intrigue, and the complex interplay of religion and governance. Historians still debate the extent to which these curses, reflected genuine spiritual fears or were political tools used by rivals. A quirky tidbit: Shah Jahan's commissioning of the Taj Mahal, a mausoleum for his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, was sometimes viewed as invoking a curse on his lineage. As subsequent rulers faced internal strife and decline, perhaps a reminder of the impermanence of power. Fringe theories suggest that Aurangzeb's austere and orthodox rule invited divine punishment, manifesting as rebellion and fragmentation of the empire, a curse narrative intertwined with religious and cultural conflicts. There's also an interesting note on the role of Sufi saints and mystics in the Mughal court, who were believed to have the power to bless or curse emperors, influencing their fortunes. Moreover, legends tell of cursed artifacts and throne rooms, where misfortune befell those who disrespected sacred objects or broke court protocols, blending superstition with political control. Another fascinating aspect is the Mughal emphasis on divine right and cosmic order, where upsetting the spiritual balance was thought to invite curses and disaster. In addition, some scholars argue that the Mughal curses serve as cautionary tales against tyranny and excess, reflecting broader societal values. Furthermore, the decline of the empire was often framed in terms of lost favor with the divine, embedding curses deeply in historical narratives. Some contemporary accounts speak of ominous dreams and portents before major upheavals, highlighting the psychological weight of curses in royal decision-making. Adding further complexity, Mughal emperors were known to consult astrologers who warned them of celestial signs, omens that some interpreted as curses foretelling their downfall. There's also an intriguing story about a jeweled dagger said to be cursed, once owned by a powerful emperor, that brought misfortune to those who wielded it improperly. Another curious detail is how the ornate throne of the Mughal emperors was rumored to be imbued with protective spells, but also curses that would punish disrespectful challengers. Additionally, some Mughal princes were believed to have been cursed from birth due to political rivalries, affecting their health and prospects, which historians see as blending superstition with court politics. Finally, the Mughal curse reminds you that even the mightiest empires grapple with fate, faith, and the specter of divine judgment. As you imagine the intricate gardens and towering minarets of the Mughal era, you sense a legacy shadowed by power and the whispered warnings of curses. You now step into the mist-shrouded forests of medieval Scandinavia, where the Vikings carved out kingdoms amidst icy fjords and looming pines. The sagas speak of royal curses cast by seers and sorcerers, powerful Jitner and Vulvas, who could sway the fate of kings with their spells and prophecies. You can almost hear the crackle of fire and the murmurs of ancient runes echoing through the longhouses. The Viking royal curses were woven deeply into their worldview, where fate or word was a binding force, and curses were seen as tangible influences on destiny. Historians still debate how much these curses influenced Viking politics versus serving as mythic storytelling. A quirky tidbit: Viking curses were sometimes carved into runestones, invoking doom upon enemies or traitors. These stones stand as silent witnesses to the belief in supernatural justice. Fringe theories suggest that some Viking curses were linked to blood feuds and political struggles, using magic as a form of psychological warfare, a tactic still debated by scholars. There's also an interesting note on the role of the Volva, a female seer whose curse or blessing could make or break a ruler, embodying the power of prophecy and fate. Moreover, many Viking kings met violent ends, fueling legends that curses laid by rivals or offended gods played a role in their demise. Another fascinating aspect is how the Christianization of Scandinavia transformed the understanding of curses, blending Old Norse beliefs with new religious frameworks. In addition, some sagas tell of cursed treasures hoards hidden in fjords and mountains, guarded by supernatural forces punishing the greedy. Furthermore, the enduring Viking fascination with fate and honor means that curses were not just threats but warnings to uphold societal values. Some historians argue that the belief in curses helped maintain order in a fiercely competitive and often brutal society. Adding to this, the ancient concept of nid, a dishonorable curse or shame, was one of the harshest punishments in Viking culture, threatening one's reputation and afterlife. There are also tales of enchanted weapons, believed to carry curses that would doom their owners or enemies, reflecting the intimate link between magic and warfare. Interestingly, the practice of seer, a form of sorcery often associated with women, was feared and sometimes linked to curses that could alter fate or bring misfortune. Some sagas describe kings consulting runamasters and seers to identify curses and seek remedies, revealing a complex system of magical and spiritual problem-solving. An intriguing note: Viking burial customs sometimes included placing items meant to counteract curses or protect the deceased in the afterlife, highlighting beliefs about spiritual warfare beyond death. Furthermore, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok includes curses and prophecies that shaped his legendary fate, blending history and myth in a powerful narrative. Finally, the Viking royal curses remind you of a world where the boundary between mortal action and supernatural consequence was fluid and deeply felt. As you imagine the longships sailing into the fog, you sense the weight of fate and curse, shaping the saga of the North. You travel now to the shadowed palaces of the Byzantine Empire, where emperors ruled with divine sanction amid a maze of political intrigue, religious fervor, and whispered curses. The Byzantine court, resplendent with gold mosaics and sacred relics, was also a place where fear of curses and the power to wield them loomed large. You can almost hear the quiet plotting behind heavy velvet curtains and the soft prayers to saints and spirits alike. The Byzantine royal curses often revolved around claims of divine justice, warnings that any usurper or tyrant would meet a cursed fate. Historians still debate how much these curses were real beliefs versus political rhetoric used to justify power struggles. A quirky tidbit: Byzantine emperors were known to carry relics believed to confer protection and curse their enemies, blending faith with political theater. Fringe theories suggest that some court intrigues involved the use of curses and occult practices, a blend of Christian and older pagan traditions, creating a complex spiritual political web. There's also an interesting note on the use of excommunication as a form of curse, wielded by the Orthodox Church to exert influence over emperors and nobles. Moreover, the fall of Constantinople in 1453 was often interpreted as divine punishment, a curse on a city and empire that had long been a bastion of Christendom. Another fascinating aspect is how Byzantine literature and hagiography include numerous stories of cursed rulers and the consequences of moral failings. In addition, Byzantine curse lore influenced later Eastern Orthodox and Slavic traditions, showing a lasting spiritual legacy. Furthermore, the intricate relationship between church and state meant curses could be both spiritual and political weapons, shaping the empire's destiny. Some historians argue that the fear of curses contributed to the empire's complex court rituals and cautious diplomacy. Adding further intrigue, the Byzantine Empress Theodora was rumored to have employed mystics and seers to cast curses on her enemies, blending politics and superstition. There's also a lesser-known tale of a sacred relic said to curse any who tried to remove it from Constantinople, serving as both a spiritual and political safeguard. Additionally, Byzantine coinage sometimes bore inscriptions believed to ward off evil, an everyday invocation against curses embedded in the empire's economy. Local legends speak of phantom emperors, whose restless spirits curse the city when the empire faces crisis, a haunting metaphor for lost glory. The ceremonial use of incense and holy water in court rituals was thought to cleanse curses and maintain divine favor. Finally, the Byzantine royal curses remind you that empire, faith, and fate are often intertwined in history's grand stage. As you envision the glittering domes of Hagia Sophia under twilight, you feel the weight of ancient curses whispered through centuries. You now enter the ornate courts of the Kingdom of Siam, modern-day Thailand, where the Chakri dynasty's royal curses echo through centuries of palace intrigue and spiritual tradition. The monarchs of Siam were believed to be protectors of cosmic order, wielding divine authority upheld by sacred curses that safeguarded the throne. You can almost hear the distant chimes of temple bells, blending with whispered incantations in golden halls. Siamese royal curses often involved strict adherence to Dharma, and the belief that any betrayal or moral failing would invite calamity not only on the individual, but on the kingdom itself. Historians still debate how much these curses influenced political stability versus serving as spiritual deterrents. A quirky tidbit, the Emerald Buddha, housed in the Grand Palace, is said to hold protective powers and curses that could curse those who disrespect it or the monarchy. Visitors and citizens alike treat it with reverence, wary of the consequences of irreverence. Fringe theories suggest that some royal curses were politically motivated, used to intimidate rivals and suppress dissent within the complex court hierarchy. There's also an interesting note on the role of Brahmin priests who conducted elaborate rituals to invoke blessings or curses, blending Hindu and Buddhist practices unique to the region. Moreover, Siam's history of coups and palace intrigues is often framed in narratives involving curses, divine retribution, and spiritual justice. Another fascinating aspect is how royal tattoos, or sakyant, were believed to carry protective curses for warriors and nobles, tying body art to spiritual power. In addition, some believe that the Chakri dynasty's longevity is due in part to their respect for these ancient curses and rituals, maintaining cosmic balance. Furthermore, the incorporation of astrology in court decisions reflects a belief in fate and curses as guiding forces in governance. Some scholars argue that curses served as both spiritual and psychological tools, reinforcing loyalty and order in a highly stratified society. Adding to the spiritual depth, the practice of Phi Tai Hong, spirits of violently dead, was feared to carry curses that could affect royal family members, necessitating elaborate rituals to appease them. There are also tales of cursed royal regalia, objects believed to carry blessings, but also curses for those who mishandled them or sought power illicitly. The kingdom's traditional dance and drama often portrayed stories of curses and divine retribution, embedding these beliefs in cultural memory. Local folklore tells of sacred groves and mountains where breaking taboos would invoke royal curses, linking landscape with spiritual law. Finally, the Siamese royal curses remind you that in this kingdom, power and spirituality are inseparable threads weaving the fabric of history. As you imagine the gilded rooftops of Bangkok shimmering under the tropical sun, You sense the enduring presence of curses guarding the throne. You journey now to the grand palaces of Imperial Japan, where the Yamato dynasty's royal curses are woven into centuries of samurai honor, Shinto rituals, and the sacred bond between emperor and land. The emperor was seen not just as a ruler, but as a divine figure, and any curse against him threatened the very soul of the nation. You can almost hear the rustle of silk kimonos and the solemn chants echoing through Shinto shrines. Japanese royal curses often centered around kami, the spirits of nature and ancestors, who could bless or curse depending on respect shown. Historians still debate whether curses were actual feared phenomena or symbolic expressions reinforcing loyalty. A quirky tidbit: the imperial regalia of Japan, the sword Kusanagi, the mirror Yata no Kagami, and the jewel Yasakane no Magatama are said to hold protective powers, but also curses for those who dare misuse them. Fringe theories propose that some curses were politically motivated, used by rival clans or factions to destabilize the emperor's authority through spiritual fear. There's also an interesting note on the role of onmyoji court sorcerers and diviners who performed rituals to invoke or lift curses, blending Taoist, Buddhist, and Shinto beliefs. Moreover, historical accounts of natural disasters and political turmoil were often interpreted as manifestations of imperial curses or loss of divine favor. Another fascinating aspect is the belief in Kasen Rufo, the spreading of peace, and how curses were seen as obstacles to this spiritual goal. In addition, kabuki and no theater often depicted stories of curses, revenge, and redemption, reflecting cultural engagement with these themes. Furthermore, the ritual suicide of samurai was sometimes linked to cleansing curses or restoring honor, showing curses' role in the moral fabric. Some scholars argue that the emperor's divine status made curses both potent and politically sensitive, shaping governance and society. Adding to this, certain shrines are believed to be cursed grounds where disrespect could unleash divine wrath upon visitors or even entire clans. There are also tales of enchanted swords and armor said to carry curses that could protect or doom their wielders, symbolizing the intimate connection between spiritual and martial power. Interestingly, folklore includes stories of vengeful spirits, or onru, whose curses could affect not only individuals, but the entire imperial line, reflecting cultural anxieties about power and morality. Another lesser-known tradition involves kododama, the mystical power of words, where spoken curses were believed to shape reality, underscoring the profound weight of language in Japanese culture. In certain historical periods, political rivals reportedly commissioned onmyoji to cast curses against enemies, blending occult practices with court intrigue. Lastly, the emperor's annual rituals, including offerings to the sun goddess Amaterasu, were seen as vital to maintaining protection and countering any lurking curses. Finally, the Japanese royal curses remind you of a world where spirituality and statehood were inseparably entwined. As you envision the cherry blossoms falling gently over Kyoto's ancient temples, you feel the lingering breath of curses shaping a nation's destiny. You now find yourself in the sun-drenched courts of the Aztec Empire, where the line between divine favor and deadly curse was razor-thin. The rulers of Tenochtitlan were seen as earthly representatives of powerful gods, tasked with maintaining cosmic balance through ritual and governance. You can almost hear the rhythmic beating of drums and the solemn chants echoing from the towering temples. Aztec royal curses were believed to be both literal and metaphorical warnings to uphold sacred laws, lest the wrath of gods like Huitzilopochtli or Tezcatlipoca be unleashed. Historians still debate how much these curses were believed by commoners and elites alike. A quirky tidbit: the Aztecs practiced ritual sacrifices not only to appease gods, but to prevent curses from falling upon their cities, blending fear, devotion, and political control. Fringe theories suggest that curses were strategically invoked to intimidate rival tribes and solidify the emperor's authority, a blend of religion and realpolitik. There's also an interesting note on the Aztec calendar and prophecy system, which foretold disasters and divine judgments, framing curses within cyclical time. Moreover, the fall of Tenochtitlan to the Spanish was seen by some indigenous people as the fulfillment of a curse or prophecy, adding spiritual weight to historical trauma. Another fascinating aspect is the use of sacred objects and codices imbued with curses, serving as both spiritual protection and political statements. In addition, some scholars explore how Aztec myths about cursed kings reflect broader themes of hubris and divine justice. Furthermore, the cultural revival of Aztec heritage today often revisits these cursed narratives as symbols of resilience and identity. Some anthropologists note that the Aztec concept of tonali, or life force, was central to understanding curses as attacks on a person's spiritual essence. Adding to the complexity, there were beliefs that breaking sacred pacts or failing ritual duties would bring not just divine wrath, but tangible curses on families and communities. There's also a lesser-known tradition where certain temples were believed to house guardian spirits who could curse or protect depending on offerings and respect. Additionally, accounts from early Spanish chroniclers describe indigenous fears of cursed objects and places, influencing the interaction between conquerors and natives. Intriguingly, some Aztec glyphs and art depict scenes of divine punishment linked to curses, offering insight into how these beliefs were visually communicated. Moreover, archaeological findings suggest that some burial sites were protected by ritual curses to deter grave robbers, blending spiritual belief with practical defense. Finally, the Aztec royal curses remind you that power was inseparable from the sacred, where blessings and curses danced on the edge of fate. As you imagine the vibrant markets and soaring pyramids, you sense the potent mix of reverence and fear that shaped an empire. You now journey deep into the mystic lands of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were worshipped as gods on earth, their rule legitimized by divine power and enforced through sacred curses. The famed Curse of the Pharaohs has long captured imaginations, with tales of tombs rigged with deadly traps and retribution for those who dared disturb eternal rest. You can almost feel the heat of the desert sun and the eerie silence of hidden chambers. Pharaoh's royal curses were believed to protect the afterlife, ensuring that tomb robbers and disrespectful outsiders would suffer divine punishment. Historians still debate how much these curses were real deterrents or posthumous legends amplified by popular media. A quirky tidbit: the opening of King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 sparked widespread reports of mysterious deaths among the expedition team, fueling belief in the curse, though many modern scholars attribute these to coincidence and illness. Fringe theories suggest that curses were both spiritual and practical warnings designed to protect treasures through fear and superstition. Scholars debate the mix of genuine belief and psychological impact. There's also an interesting note on the use of hieroglyphic curses inscribed on tomb walls, often invoking gods like Anubis and Osiris to guard the deceased. Moreover, Some curses specifically targeted grave robbers, threatening blindness, death, or eternal damnation, reflecting the importance placed on preserving sacred spaces. Another fascinating aspect is how ancient Egyptians believed in Heka, or magical power, which empowered curses and rituals alike. In addition, funerary texts like the Book of the Dead contain spells meant to protect the deceased from harm, showing the interplay of blessing and curse in the afterlife journey. Furthermore, Egyptian priests played key roles in maintaining these spiritual protections, performing rituals to renew and enforce curses. Some modern historians argue that the so-called curse myth has overshadowed the rich religious and cultural significance of Egyptian burial practices. Adding to the mystery, recent archaeological discoveries suggest that some tombs contain symbolic trap mirrors, false chambers, and misleading inscriptions designed to confuse or deter intruders rather than cause physical harm. There's also a lesser-known belief that the pharaoh's spirit could manifest as a protective force, actively defending the tomb from desecration, blurring the lines between curse and guardian. Moreover, certain animals, like the sacred cobra, were associated with royal protection and curses, often depicted on royal regalia as symbols of divine wrath. Some evidence suggests that funerary goods were ritually cursed through symbolic destruction if stolen, a practice aimed at social deterrence. In addition, ancient Egyptian medicine intertwined curses with healing rituals, reflecting a holistic approach to spiritual and physical well-being. Finally, the pharaoh's curse reminds you of a civilization deeply connected to the mysteries of death, power, and the sacred. As you imagine the golden mask of Tutankhamun shining in the dim light, you feel the haunting legacy of curses guarding the eternal sleep. You arrive at the windswept moors of Scotland, where the legend of the cursed Stuart dynasty looms large, a tale of power, betrayal, and a family said to be shadowed by an unbreakable curse. The Stuarts, who once ruled Scotland and later England, were believed to carry a spiritual burden that shaped their fate across centuries. You can almost hear the haunting echoes of bagpipes carried by the chill wind and the rustle of ancient tartans in the mist. The Stuart curse is often traced back to a betrayal or broken oath, believed to doom the dynasty with misfortune, death, and loss. Historians still debate the origins and reality of this curse, but its influence permeates Scottish folklore and royal history. A quirky tidbit: one version of the curse claims that the Stuart kings would suffer untimely deaths or lose their crowns, a pattern eerily reflected in historical events, including the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Fringe theories suggest that the curse was amplified by political rivals and superstition, serving as a tool to undermine the Stuarts' legitimacy. There's also an interesting note on how the Stuart symbol, the rampant lion, was believed to carry both royal authority and the weight of ancestral curses. Moreover, stories tell of haunted castles and battlefields linked to the Stuarts, where restless spirits and curses are said to linger. Another fascinating aspect is how the curse narrative influenced Scottish nationalism and identity, intertwining royal history with cultural memory. In addition, some scholars explore the curse as a metaphor for the challenges of leadership and the fragile nature of power. Furthermore, the Stuart curse connects to broader themes of fate, justice, and the supernatural in Scottish storytelling. Some legends say that the curse could only be lifted by reconciliation and justice, though whether this ever happened remains part of the mystery. Adding further layers, the Stuart family's ties to witchcraft accusations during turbulent times added fuel to the belief in their cursed fate, blending political fear with supernatural dread. There are also accounts of prophetic dreams and omens experienced by Stuart monarchs, reflecting the psychological weight of the curse in their reign. Additionally, traditional Scottish ballads and poems keep the curse alive, passing the tale through generations with a mix of sorrow and awe. Some historians point to the clan's complex relationship with neighboring families, where blood feuds may have been interpreted as manifestations of the curse. In certain regions, local customs developed to ward off the Stuart curse, involving protective charms and ritual cleansing. Finally, the Stuart dynasty's curse reminds you that history often wears a cloak of legend, where truth and myth entwine. As you imagine the rolling hills and ancient ruins bathed in twilight, you feel the enduring presence of curses shaping a kingdom's story. Hey guys, as we gently close this long journey through time and tale, let's slow our breath and soften our thoughts. We've wandered across kingdoms and empires, whispered through corridors of ancient palaces, and felt the chill of royal curses that once cast long shadows over history. From the haunted stones of the Tower of London to the windswept moors of Scotland, each story has woven together the threads of power, fate, and mystery. You might recall the uneasy silence surrounding the English princes who vanished in their fortress home, the towering echo of innocence lost and secrets forever locked in stone. Then the grim feast of the Black Dinner in Scotland, where betrayal and blood mingled, setting a curse that rippled through generations. The great Egyptian sands whispered of Napoleon's campaign, where desert heat mixed with fears of ancient wrath, and the rise and fall of empires seemed intertwined with divine judgment. From the golden halls of the Ottoman sultans, with their whispered curses and ghostly protectors, to the sacred islands of Hawaii, where Mana and Kapu laws guarded kings and their land, these tales have revealed how curses are never just about fear, but about respect, order, and the delicate balance between human will and cosmic law. We saw the cursed gold of the Incas, shining bright but heavy with doom for those who dared to take it, and the tragic fall of the French Bourbons, whose fate became a symbol of revolution and the fragile nature of royal power. The Mughal emperors' palaces echoed with omens and spiritual warnings, while the fierce Vikings trusted in runes and fate, their curses carved in stone and sung in sagas. Byzantine courts mingled faith and politics, wielding curses as both spiritual and political weapons. Across to the vibrant courts of Siam, where divine laws and sacred tattoos intertwine power and the supernatural. Japan's imperial legacy taught us about the weight of divine right, mystical regalia, and the Onmyoji's subtle art, while the Aztecs danced on the edge of blessing and doom, their rituals a vivid reminder of the delicate dance between humanity and gods. And deep within Egypt's ancient tombs, the eternal curses guarding Pharaoh's rest remind us of a civilization fascinated by death's mysteries. Finally, the Stuarts of Scotland, burdened by legend and loss, show us how curses can become a nation's shadow and a family's story. As you lie here now, feeling the soft pulse of the night, remember that these curses, though terrifying in tale, are echoes of a world where people sought meaning in chaos, control in fate, and justice in the unknown. They whisper to us not just about fear, but about the hope to understand life's fragile threads. Your breath slows, your body eases, and the stories settle gently in the quiet corners of your mind. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and drift with the calm of these ancient whispers. Let your dreams carry you beyond time and space, where curses dissolve into stardust and peace reigns. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well under the watchful stars. Sweet dreams.